Hello and welcome, I'm Dr. Tony Wakeford. A recurring topic today is not in my backyard, the regular and various protests and objections to a wide variety of building and infrastructure projects. We should perhaps spare a thought for the directors of the Brighton and Chichester Railway Company and the woes and frustrations that they experienced over the planned extension of the railway from the London and Brighton Railway Company's terminus at Shoreham along the Sussex coastal plain to Chichester during the mid-1840s. The minutes of the company's first general meeting after the Act of Parliament had received its royal assent in July 1844 provides a graphic account of local influences and difficulties faced by the company. In obtaining this act, your directors, under their former designation of a provisional committee, had to contend with no ordinary difficulty which met them at every threshold and extended from Shoreham to the right bank of the River Arun. Every interest set themselves in array against them, whether in the shape of landowners, turnpike trusts, proprietors of vested rights in navigation, ferries or otherwise on the two rivers, Adur and Arun. Of the landowners, the whole gave way under the just and equitable propositions made to them, with one exception. The difficulties and opposition that the Brighton Chichester Railway Company experienced in crossing the Adur and Arun had their roots in the previous century. The rivers were a serious impediment to east-west travel and communication along the coast, and involved a long and circuitous north-south journeys to Bramber and Arundel to overcome the obstacles of the Adur and Arun respectively. The first discussions to construct a bridge to replace the ferry at Old Shoreham took place in 1780. The ferry crossing was dangerous, and the solution was to construct a bridge to enable road vehicles and animals to cross the Adur in safety and avoid the circuitous detour. An Act of Parliament was passed in the following year and construction began, trustees were appointed and the bridge was opened in March 1782. Weather conditions in 1821 caused serious damage to the bridge and the foundations. Costly maintenance eventually led to a proposal in 1829, supported by the Duke of Norfolk, who paid the trustees an annuity, to build a new bridge further south with the turnpike road giving a more direct route to and from Worthing. The new Norfolk Bridge was approved by Act of Parliament in 1830. As this slide shows, it was a grand and ornate suspension bridge designed by William Tierney Clark and opened with great ceremony by the Duke of Norfolk on the 1st of May 1833. In 1849, a similar designed bridge by Clark was opened in Budapest in Hungary over the River Danube, and the similarity can be seen in the insert picture. The railway company's plans ran into immediate and considerable opposition at Shoreham from landowners and those with commercial and transport interests who perceived the railway would be a threat. There was also opposition because from the Shoreham terminus the line had to be raised sufficiently to attain a suitable height to cross the river. This involved a steep embankment and the stopping and diverting of several roads and the demolition of several buildings in New Shoreham parish. On the 18th of April 1844, Lord Howard, Duke of Norfolk, presented a petition to Parliament opposing the extension of the Brighton and Chichester Railway Company's line from the London and Brighton Railway Company's terminus at Shoreham. He also represented various interests on behalf of the Lancing Roads Turnpike Trust and the annuitants of the Old Shoreham Bridge. His view of the railway's benefits and utility was hardly a glowing testament. That in the opinion of your petitioner, the making of the said railway in the line proposed is not likely to be of sufficient public advantage to justify the interference and destruction of the property of your petitioner and the other owners and occupiers of property in the line of the said railway. Because the railway was within a 1 mile limit of the Norfolk Road Bridge and the ancient limits of the old Ferry and bridge, the construction of the line required the permission of the Duke. He would not agree due to the anticipated loss of tolls from Norfolk Bridge and the adjoining Lancing Roads Turnpike Trust, in which he had a financial interest. Agreement was eventually reached and a settlement of £42,000 in compensation was paid to the Duke by the railway company, with £4,275 for the Lancing Roads Trust and £10,000 for the inheritance of the old bridge. The new railway bridge, costing £24,000, was a trestle design with a traditional wooden pier structure and cast iron girders, as this rather splendid view looking south shows. The two towers of the Norfolk Bridge can be seen in the background. Crossing the River Arun between Arundel and Littlehampton was much more complicated and involved opposition from the Littlehampton Ferry and Roads Company, the Port Commissioners of Arundel and Littlehampton, and the Way and Arun Canal Company. There were also practical considerations that did not exist with crossing the Adur. The proposed line of the railway required a bridge at Ford, where none had previously existed on this navigable part of the river, and as a consequence this also drew the attention of the Admiralty. The Port Commissioners were fiercely opposed not only for commercial reasons, but also to ensure the continued unimpeded navigation of the river. This included testimony from mariners who claimed that a bridge would be a serious impediment to navigation. The railway river crossing was eventually approved by the Admiralty by allowing the construction of a novel wooden telescopic bridge, the only one of its kind at the time, that could be withdrawn landwards to enable ships to sail unhindered along that part of the river. This slide, looking north, shows the new bridge and the section that withdraws to the right to allow the passage of ships. The commercial objections of the Way and Arun Canal Company and the Arundel and Littlehampton Port Commissioners were overruled, but the petition of the Littlehampton Ferry and Roads Company was successful. As with the crossing of the Adur, compensation would be the solution to resolve and mitigate local concerns. There was a ferry for foot passengers at Littlehampton that by the early 1820s had operated for many years. The increase in population and connectivity between communities either side of the river led to plans to upgrade the ferry. The preamble to the eventual Act of Parliament noted that it would greatly contribute to the advantage, convenience and accommodation of such inhabitants to have a ferry established for carriages, horses, cattle, foot passengers and portable articles over the said river at Littlehampton. When plans for the railway line crossing the Arun were announced, the Ferry Company was successful in their petition to Parliament to require the railway company to pay compensation for any losses accrued. The level of compensation was calculated by the difference between the annual tolls and £450, being the average income over the previous 10 years prior to the railway opening. The accounts of the Ferry Company provide a clear picture of the impact of the railway opening in 1846. The decline in the period after the railway opened was more marked because the end of the accounting year changed in 1848 from the 31st of March to the 8th of June. The Ferry Company's expected average revenue fell by £115 in the first year of railway operations. In the second year the revenue was £213 below the expected average. The slide shows the revenue of the ferry and the rapid decline when the railway opened, but compensation payments helped to maintain the annual income. Although the revenue soon began to rise after the railway had opened, their gradual increase never regained the level of pre-railway income. Despite the reduced revenue, the Ferry Company continued to operate, but with mixed fortunes. In 1872 the tolls were increased for all vehicles and animals. By April 1873 the original barge, having been repaired and improved in 1840 and 1862, was in need of replacement. A new chain ferry was ordered from a firm in Plymouth at a cost of £750. Presumably the level of traffic and revenue must have made such a financial undertaking a viable option. The minutes of the meeting of proprietors on the 2nd of July 1897 noted that the traffic and receipts were much reduced for the year ending 7th of June 1897 due to a very wet autumn. The old Shoreham Bridge was subsequently purchased by the railway company, now the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, and was rebuilt to the same design in 1916. It is now a footbridge and has become a memorial site for the Shoreham air crash in 2015. Due to structural weaknesses, the Norfolk Bridge was demolished and replaced in the 1920s. This in turn was replaced by the current bridge in the 1980s. The original railway wooden trestle bridge was replaced in the 1890s by a 16-span steel structure, one of the earliest of its type. It was constructed in sections nearby and then moved into position. The Ford Rail Bridge was a considerable constraint on railway operations, as the opening and closing was a lengthy and laborious process. It was subsequently replaced in the 1860s by an iron bridge of a similar arrangement but designed to be opened and closed more quickly. The slide shows the complex operating arrangements. A fixed span was subsequently installed in the 1930s in preparation for electrification, when the river was no longer navigable for larger vessels. The Littlehampton ferry continued to operate until 1908, when it was then replaced by a swing bridge. This was then replaced in the 1980s, with history repeating itself, by a footbridge with a retractable centre section to allow navigation, similar in principle to the original Ford Railway Bridge, and remains in use today. The rivers have long ceased to be the barriers and impediment to communication and transport that they once were in the 18th century. As this brief snapshot has highlighted, there was considerable endeavour, ingenuity and money involved to overcome these obstacles, in which the railway companies played and paid their part. Thank you for listening.